Next up, we have our Data Visualization and Storytelling panel with Stacey Stewart, Isabel Ribeiro, and TR Kannan.
I'm Stacey Stewart, currently a Chief Information Officer with 30-year career in IT and always have been working with data. So it's my pleasure to moderate today's panel where we'll discuss the opportunities and challenges in data visualization and storytelling. So we do have a treat here to be with two very well-versed panelists in this area. We have Isabel, an IT Senior Director at McDermott Will and Emery, and TR, who's in charge of Procurement Strategy and Operations at Chemours. So I was interested in both of their backgrounds because our panelists come from very different industries, right? So as we go through the different questions we have, I think it will be interesting to see how common the data challenges are. Completely different industries, but let's see how common or different they are. And as we talk about careers in data, I think that we'll see some general themes that it doesn't matter where you work. I think we'll find some things that are in common. So to kick us off, I'll start with asking Isabel a question and then TR can answer it. Explain what you've done in the storytelling visualization area. Any examples you can share from your personal journey? That would be great to hear.
Sure, great, thank you. So in my role as a senior director in running a project management office, currently, for those who don't know McDermott Will and Emery, I should probably start there. We're an international law firm based out of New York City. And part of my role is just to manage all our projects across the organization. So with managing these roles, there's a lot of data that I have to present on a regular basis. So some of the data is very simple. Other data is a little bit more complex because it really depends on the projects. And the audience that I have to present that data to are senior leadership, all the way to technologists, all the way to business sponsors who might not have a technical background, who really don't understand how technology works. The difference, the different audiences or the diversity of the audiences actually require that I change the way I present the data and because they might not be familiar with the topic. So it might overwhelm them if I don't present it in a certain way. So I'll just illustrate a couple of ways that I have done this in the past. One way, in order for me to, on a quarterly basis, in order for me to let the IT organization know what is happening within the IT portfolio, I produce a newsletter. It's a 2-page newsletter, so very condensed, and I have to put a lot of information into that newsletter. So what I do is I use a summary-oriented approach because that works really well. Basically, what I do is I highlight several projects that we're working on, key projects, and then I also put in like a key process that the IT organization needs to know about, needs to be familiar with. This way, they will have the information that they need, the key information. They can always reach out to me to get more details if they need to, especially on other data points that they might find of interest. And that has worked really well for that audience. On the other hand, I also present to a project risk review committee. That committee is made up of technical and non-technical individuals. So in that instance, what I do is I curate the data. So I present it in a timeline-based presentation. So I use PowerPoint for that. And I present the data on where are we now on projects, what's going on, what kind of work is going on, and what's coming up in the quarter. So that way the data is very structured for them. It doesn't really overwhelm them and it aligns with their needs because all they're really looking for is what risk are we taking on when we have these projects kicking off. And so they're very focused on the information that I provide, and it works for them. So I find that works for them. And so these are just like two simple ways that I actually share data and storytell in my line of work.
Great, thanks, Isabel. TR, how about you?
Yeah, thanks, Stacey, and thank you for SheTek for doing this conference and giving me the opportunity. So I'm very honored to be here, I should say. I work for a company called Chemours. It's not, again, like a household name. We're a big company, $6+ billion globally, but our products go into the products that you all use. So it could have been your Apple Watch, the flight you take, and so on. before I get into the specific example, I just wanted to provide the context about data, right? If you have not heard this, I mean, people say data is like oil, right, in the digital world. And what does it mean? So oil is sometimes, you can say it's scarce, but data is not. The amount of data that gets produced every day keeps growing at a very fast pace. But data could be used or abused, right? So based on how you look at it. I'll share one specific example first. When I took this role more than 2 years ago, the performance of my department wasn't where our stakeholders wanted it to be. So I worked with my team, and we really, for like several months, we did very well and we improved it. So we started off from people who used to come to us when there's a problem to people who stopped coming to us because there's no problem. So I was talking to my manager at my end of the year, and I said, "Hey, we're doing great." And she said, "How do you know?" And I was shocked, right? I said, "I know." She's like, "Well, how does others know?" So we went back and we said, "Well, we need to sell this." So we started putting together very simple metrics on our performance, our department's performance. And then we started publishing that in a monthly basis, saying, "Hey, look at where we were 6 months ago before we got together to improve it versus where we are now." So that kind of a storytelling, that visualization, started sharing that. It went all the way to our CEO also at some point, and that kind of improved our branding of, "You guys made a difference here." And I'm trying to do that and make it much broader for the rest of the department also to show our performance.
That's great. I love that. It's the data about the data, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Isabel, you touched on this a little bit already, but what are the key principles and best practices, considerations? I mean, you highlighted before, know your audience, but any other kind of considerations to consider when creating effective data visualization and storytelling?
So I have 5 rules, and I live by these 5 rules. So know your audience is the very first one. That was in my early career. That was the number one rule that one of my mentors taught me. And I've used that from ever since, because it is the key rule for every time you're telling a story or you're presenting data, even if it's simple data. There's no such thing as simple data, but if there was simple data, right, it's still, you still need to know who your audience are. So the first thing I always do is I find out, who am I speaking with or presenting in front of? You know, what matters to them? I need to know who they are, what really matters to them, what are they looking for, what kind of information do they need, how well versed on the subject they are, because that's going to be extremely important as well, because I have to tailor my message to that audience. And you could have a mixture of audience, individuals that know your data very well and others that do not. So you need to be very creative in the way you approach how you're going to tell that story. So the greater the more familiar someone is with the data or the information that you're going to present, the more prepared you have to be. So anticipating questions that they might have. And then the least amount of information that the audience is familiar with, then you need to make sure that you're not overwhelming them. Okay, so that knowing your audience is very, very important. Those are the elements that you have to look for. The second rule is clarity on the communication. What's your message? So I always think of, who's my audience? What am I going to message them, right? Or is it too much detail? Is it not enough detail? What's crucial? Trim the fat, as I call it. I always use this term all the time. Trim the fat. Do you have too much? Can you take some things out and still maintain your message? That's very important as well. Then the third rule is precision. So in a lot of, especially in the work that I do, you have to be very precise in your data. Presenting numbers is very, very important, especially if you're speaking about budgets, right? You have to be very precise. You can't just make up numbers or pull them out of the blue, or think that you have the right numbers and then you find out you don't have the right numbers. So you have to make sure that you have the right information. So precision. And then also important is, take your bias out of the picture. don't have, and we all have biases, right? So let's just put it out there. We all do have biases. We all think that we know all this information and this is the way it should be done, and that's the way someone else should receive the information. So you want to make sure you're looking for that and you're taking that out. That sometimes becomes a little bit, how can I say this? Bias upon bias. Let's just say that, okay? Because you know your data, but you really need to have another set of eyes look at your data. The other rule, the fourth rule is, how are you structuring your story? Does it flow? Is it simple enough? Are you focusing on one key element versus everything that you can give everyone? So make sure that you're simplifying, make sure that the way you're communicating has a natural flow to it. Don't just put information in there and hope that it kind of flows well. You have to make sure you take the time to prepare for that. And then the final one is practice, right? Practice, practice, practice. Take your time, put your presentation together, walk away from it, come back, revisit, have someone else review it, practice presenting that content, because in the long run, you are telling a story. And if you're trying to convince someone that the story you're telling is something they need to pay attention to, it has to be done a certain way. So those are my 5 rules. I use them all the time, and everyone that works for me, those are the 5 rules that I give them. They have to go through that process to make sure that they're ready to present.
That's great. I wrote them down. I'm going to repeat them at the end. And
okay.
I'm going to use them too. That's awesome.
Okay,
That's
good.
Great. Love them. TR, what are some innovative or creative ways to present data? Can you share any sorts of different, methods, tools, creative ways to tell your story?
Yeah, I was also listening, Stacey, to Isabel, and I had like 4 things actually. I think the 5th one was the practice thing, which I missed, which is also important, but very similar, right? First, you got to think about the context and the audience. So, like, who are you communicating this to, and why should they listen to you? Is the first one. Why should they listen to you talk, or why should they listen to or open your email or look at your PowerPoint or whatever? And then you got to think about your narrative, right? So what's your beginning, like any story, right? What's your beginning, what's your end, what's the middle of the story, and so on. Picking up what Isabel said, to the data quality is going to be important. The precision, I think you call it, right? So how you can't have bad data, because people will lose trust in what you're going to say. If you present something, if they start questioning that doesn't seem right or whatever, then you lose all credibility very quickly. And then visuals, right? So how are you going to show the visuals there? When I think of that example, when you say creative or innovative, people think of something very fancy and whatnot, but actually doesn't have to be that. There are actually very, very simple ways you can also be communicating things, and sometimes that's innovative itself. And one of the roles I also have, in addition to my day job at Chemours, is I also sit on my local school board, I'm currently the president of the school board, and I also happen to be the president of the school board during COVID. And there's a lot of emotions going on through the entire community, the staff and everything. And people wanted to know, and the school board was tasked with figuring out, should we open schools? Should we not open schools? When should you open schools, right? So I'm sure many of you have gone through that journey yourself. But I was put in that hot seat of communicating to 10,000 kids and their families. So huge audience, but something that's very, very important to them. So we came up with a very simple grid. It was just a 2x2 matrix. We decided we will use the hospitalization in the area, and we will use the number of tests, positive tests, and we identified the right data sources, which data source do we rely on and not rely on. And we said, okay, if this is here and here, the school will not be open, and we'll track this for a week, and then we can't do it every day. So it was very simple, but it was a very simple red, yellow, green with a 2x2 matrix that we published to the whole community and say, here you go. This is how we are going to manage this. And again, as I said, very simple, but was very powerful.
Yeah. And it's so true, right? We've all seen charts that are way too fancy that you have to spend too much time to figure it out, versus kind of keeping it simple. Although I do like the map charts sometimes, where you can get some level of space. So no, that's great. So let's talk tools. and TR, I'll stay with you. What are the tools? You know, we have people here that are looking in roles, and obviously you need skills. So what are the tools that you use or have used or your company uses to do data storytelling and visualization?
Yeah, so before I get to specific tools, the trend in the technology space has grown tremendously, right? So if you're doing this seminar 10 years ago, we can probably list the tools in like one hand, maybe in many cases. Now there's probably hundreds of tools in every discipline you look at. The other trend I've seen is before people used to go to a highly paid, highly skilled IT person to do things for you. And now there's this whole concept of citizen development where companies, even the big companies, right, Microsoft, etc., and the IT department saying, look, I'll give you these platforms, go build it yourself. Right? Don't come to us. So that's been a big shift in the trend I've seen. But very specifically, if I start naming, I've seen like tools like Tableau, which has been pretty good with visualization, and some of the maps that Stacey you're referring to, I saw were built on the Tableau platform, on at least the free ones that I've seen. More recently, within our company, we have embarked more on Microsoft platforms. So Power BI is a good platform that's good for visualization. But again, as we talked earlier, the data precision, data quality is important. So there are preparation tools. So Alteryx is a tool that we use. Very powerful. Again, you don't need hardcore IT skills to build it. You can drag and drop. And so those are another tool that I've seen. And even basic stuff, right? I think, Isabel, you mentioned it, like PowerPoint, Excel. I mean, they're tools too, and you can really make them come to life by having powerful presentations. And I don't think we can end any conversation without talking about AI. So in the past, when somebody says, what are the tools? You can go to Google and say, hey, Google, what are the tools? Now we can go to ChatGPT, and you can probably get better results and better relevance there than before.
Yeah, and even some of those AI tools that are evolving can do some storytelling. You can
Exactly.
put some data in. So yeah,
definitely
for
AI,
everyone,
right?
start looking there. Yeah. Isabel, how about you? What tools are you all using?
So similar to what TR mentioned, I do have a preference for PowerPoint, but that's just my own preference. And it really depends the audience that I'm presenting to. But I like PowerPoint because you can add graphics in. You can tell the story, especially a very boring topic, right? If you have numbers that you have to present, you can actually make the numbers what I like to call sing, right? The numbers can sing, they can tell their own story with a visual, and it keeps the audience more attentive to what you're presenting, and it really engages them. So PowerPoint is a great tool. I do like, that's one of my preferences, but it's not the only tool. So I do use Excel as well. So I'll create pivot tables, especially if I have a large amount of data and I need to show that data in its entirety. So a pivot table is a great way to do that. You know, creating some chart out of Excel, even if you created an Excel and you bring it to another medium, that's fine. That's perfectly acceptable, and you should consider doing that. And then Power BI, that's what we use internally. I do like Power BI because I can slice and dice the data any way I need to show it. I can have dashboards created. I can click within the dashboard, present or highlight a specific data point, and present on that data point. So those are some of the tools that I use. I also do use ChatGPT. Maybe I shouldn't, but I do. And I'm a big fan of, if you don't have to create it from scratch, use something that someone else has used, right? So for example, I'll go into Google and do a quick search for, show me this type of data presentation. And then I'll use, not that I'm using that specific tool, but it gives me ideas on how I can present my data using very creative ways. So a lot of different tools. The preference is really up to you and the audience that you're presenting to. So I'm always, again, my golden rule, know your audience. I always go back to them. If I'm presenting in front of an IT person, obviously my presentation is completely different. But if I'm going to present, because I work in the legal industry, if I present in front of lawyers, then obviously I'm not overwhelming them with Excel. I might put something in a PowerPoint. So just remember always the theme, and I'll always keep repeating this one, know your audience. your audience should dictate how you're going to present and what method you're going to present it in.
So let's move to, I'll stay with you, Isabel, on this point. You shared a lot about the good things to do and the guiding principles. Can you share some pitfalls and, the things to stay away from, especially in the ethics area where we have to be concerned sometimes with data storytelling and how to, you mentioned bias before, but maybe there's even more you can probe on ethics and how to use data. Anything there to share?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the biggest pitfalls when sharing data and really just any information is selection, right? So the very common one is that we cherry pick what we want to show. That could absolutely happen. And sometimes cherry picking is good, right? Because if the data is very complex, you need to really tailor that data down and bring it down to a more digestible way of for your audience to receive that information. But also at the same time, you have to think of, am I inadvertently omitting critical points in the data? So you want to make sure you could cherry pick, but at the same time, are you missing any critical points that change the story that you're telling? So that's very, very important. The other one is fact checking, right? So did you check the data? So one of the things that I have done this, and I'll admit I'm guilty of it sometimes. If I get data from my accounting folks, I assume it's correct, right? Because they're accounting. So if they're giving me numbers, I'm like, oh, of course they check their numbers. Well, I have to make sure that I double check that because, they're human like us. They make mistakes. They might have a lot on their plate and they did their quick check, but they didn't do a in-depth check or review. And so that data might not be 100% where it needs to be. So you need to make sure that you're fact checking everything you're putting in your presentation, right? Accuracy, ask questions, questioning the data of someone who's supposed to be the expert in the data is not a bad thing. Okay. You just need to remember you have to do that. It's not an insult to anyone. You're not insulting. You shouldn't be insulting anyone. So those are just some of the things to be careful with when you're presenting data. Very, very important. In the legal industry, the one that I work in, and all of us have legal obligations too, even if you're not in legal, there are a few things to consider. So one is data privacy. Very, very big. Make sure that you're not, you're either masking sensitive and confidential information or you're not even providing it. Okay. So data privacy, very, very important, especially if your audience is not aware of that data. If you're presenting outside of your organization and that data should not be known to anyone else. Or even if it's like a client data, you need to make sure that you either mask or you don't present it or you present it in a completely different way that cannot be deciphered by anyone. The other one is give credit where credit is due, right? So easy enough to say, well, accounting gave me this data. Well, give them the credit because they really do deserve the credit if it's accounting that's giving you the data. And make sure that and if it's a co-credit, then give co-credit also. The other one is bias, which I already spoke about. And so storytelling bias, big one as well. And then tone and messaging. I think we earlier spoke a little bit about that. So how are you presenting that message, right? Let's just say, for example, I've had the situation happen because I work with IT projects and deployments on a regular basis, the sky is falling tone that I sometimes have from people. Well, is it really falling or are we just panicking because we think it's falling? So make sure that when the words are crucial, you need to make sure they're using the right words, the right interpretation, the right tone. I try to be in my presentations, I always put a positive spin on everything, even if the sky is falling. I don't want to create panic. So it's always, okay, this is happening, but here's the plan to move forward. So those are some of the things to just be aware of. Creating panic when you're presenting data is never really a good thing either. So you might want to change your story a little bit or your tone in your story.
Great. Good. I have another 5 rules that I'll repeat for everyone at the end. Let's move over to skills. So TR, I'll ask you, what are the key skills and qualifications that employers look for in candidates that are pursuing, any sort of data analyst, visualization, storytelling role?
I would say a few things, right? I know we generally talk about people being left brain or right brained, but this looks like one of those unique roles where you need to be both to some extent, because you need to be very good with analytical capability so you can take data, understand data, manipulate data. At the same time, you need to be somewhat creative to say, how do I show this in a way to this audience? How do I communicate this? So the communication skills are going to be equally important as much as your data analysis and the critical thinking and analytical skills, I would say there.
And what about the harder, like the technical skills? Do you feel like those are just easy enough to pick up, or should people be pursuing, like, do you look for certain kinds of certifications, Excel certification, anything like that?
I know different people have different views of certification, so it's something I personally, or I've not, depends on the employer, I guess, but it's good to have a certification which shows you cared enough to pursue it. But just because, look at another way, people who have certification doesn't mean that they're good at it. So it's one of those things where I wouldn't do it, but I wouldn't just bank on just that. But having the right, critical thinking skills, analytical skills are more important than I know how to use Power BI, because several years ago it didn't exist, and in the future I'm sure it won't. So it's not about just the tools, but the adaptability, the ability to learn something new is much more important than a tool or a specific certification in the tool.
And I love sharing skills like that with an audience like this, because then it makes the tech feel less intimidating. If you're critical, you're curious, so many jobs are open to you if you've got that analytical mindset, and the tech you can figure out or learn, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Isabel, how about for you? What key skills and qualifications that you'd add to what TR said? Anything you'd add?
So I 100% agree with him and what you said. You don't need technical skills. Technical skills can be learned, right? It's really that analysis and the data analysis interpretation that's really critical. So you need to have, and as TR mentioned this, you just have to have a certain way of, your brain has to function a certain way. Let's just say it that way. And sometimes we don't know that our brain functions that way because we're not given the opportunity to be that creative or to be able to interpret data. So a lot of times I think in the industry, especially in technology, if you don't have a tech degree, it's like, oh, you can't do this. Now, I don't have a tech degree. I have a marketing degree. So I'm the accidental technologist. I just somehow fell into it without realizing I even had this type of skill set that I could use in technology, right? Because you usually think of technology as a technical background, someone who does coding and so on, but that's not really true. So what I look for in someone is that data analysis, that interpretation. Can they take a data set and interpret and decipher the meaning, right? Because data can be very overwhelming. Can they comprehend it in a way that they can communicate it to someone else? Then the other part that I look for is the organizational skills. Can they organize? Because that's going to be important for that data interpretation, right? You have to be able to interpret, but then organize the data so that it can be clearly presented to someone, whoever that audience might be. And then the last one is the communication skills. So those are really three important. It's the interpretation, the organization of the data, and how do you communicate that out to your audience. Those are three critical skills that, I'll be honest, and for anyone who's a tech guru here, Stacey, I apologize to you now, but you don't need to be usually technologists, tech don't possess these type of skills, right? They usually, especially when it comes to communication and organization, they're not the best at it. So it is for me and for the staff that I have, those are skills that I highly look for and hire people with those skill sets, not necessarily the technology part.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you both said too. Like and you kind of overlaid on a few areas. I would add one more for those that are looking at some of the technical skills, okay, I'm leaving out the IT space, is to, when you're working with a data set, to do a little bit of some skills in database modeling and understand how a database works with, unique identifiers and one-to-one relationships, many-to-one, because it does help you understand when you have to do the visualization, how to connect the data sets, even in the simple tools. And I found, you have lots of people that might know Excel, but the hard part, anyone can do a formula. The hard part is to figure out what formula to do or which fields to connect. So definitely brush up on the what to do, not so much how to do it. But yeah, lots of opportunities out that are free on the internet as well, right, to get those skills. Okay, so this one's for TR. What advice would you give someone starting their career in data storytelling or visualization in terms of building skills, networking, finding job opportunities?
I caught the tail end of the previous topic, and I think there's some relevance there too, because the last person was talking about something similar. First of all, you all own your own career, so don't think somebody else, whether it is your boss or somebody, is going to get you a job, get you promoted and whatnot, right? So if it happens, great, but don't bank on it. So we all own our own careers and our own growth path. Another story I remember hearing growing up was about I'll paraphrase this, like you don't start digging a well when you're thirsty. So one, you'll be tired, and then that's not the time to do it. And why I'm saying that is, like, when we talk about networking, people tend to come, like I've seen it myself too, like somebody I've not heard for like ages will suddenly come to me and say, I lost my job, can you help me? And I feel bad, and I do actually try to help them, but don't wait for that, right? Build the networking and building that relationship. It shouldn't come across as when you need something from the other person. So you should be doing it on an ongoing basis. So build that network, right? So build your tribe. Who's your core friends and well-wishers. Find a mentor, right? I mean, and I also say, like, the mentor doesn't have to be, and maybe it doesn't have to be in your own company. Find a mentor who's in a different company, who can guide you along and so on there. LinkedIn is a great platform. I'm sure there are other avenues too, but engage with people, follow articles, attend conferences and webinars like these. There are a lot of, like, if you're local to any meetup events or things like that, go there. But build that engagement right now. Actually, you need to do the networking when you do not need something from somebody. And that's the right place and the important place to start, and build that mutual relationship where you kind of build a connection and you help them and they help you when you need help and so on.
Yeah, thanks. I caught the end of the last one too, and definitely it reinforces it's the same theme everywhere, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So last question, and then we'll take some questions from the group. And this one's for Isabel. What are some effective strategies for building a strong portfolio in data storytelling or visualization? How can candidates showcase? So you show up for an interview. How do you explain and show what you do, what you've done?
So a couple of things that they can do is they can discuss how they view data, right? So one of the things that they should be able to present to you during an interview or just in any discussion is the way that they look at data, how they interpret data. They should also be able to, the communication, the way they communicate will be an indicator for you as well, right? And then how do they present themselves? Like, what are those presentation skills? Because there's an art to presenting who you are, what you do, especially in an interview when it's a very stressful time for you, and you can get really sidetracked. And then also, if you're asking for after the interview, or if you're presenting yourself to, even if it's not an interview, let's just take it as you're presenting to another group within your organization. Ask for feedback. What worked, what didn't work, not necessarily what I did well or what I did bad, but what worked in the presentation, what didn't work. Those are all, and again, you can feedback is a great tool, right? And really, for me, it's just really about that presentation, about that, how you interpret data, how you present the way you interpret data, and looking for feedback from individuals. The feedback for me has been, over the course of my career, has been the most valuable part of my growth and how I present myself to others, and then how I present either internally or externally of my organization. It really has been it allowed me to grow and do more things than what I would typically have done or even thought I could possibly do. So those are my takeaways.
That's great. This is a question for both of you. I was just trying to think of, in my world with data, you can often force the story with data and it can go either way. Have you ever been able to look at the data and tell the story either way and maybe highlight one area or the other? And that's the power, right, that you have as the storyteller. Have you found yourself in that situation where you could lead the witness with the same data set either way?
I have. So in my, especially when I'm presenting to audience that are not technical, the way they look at the data that I'm presenting, they have their own interpretation. And because I do work with lawyers, they're always analyzing everything that is presented to them. So for me, I have to be able to quickly pivot in different directions. And I typically do, because when I'm presenting in front of an audience that's not a technical audience, I am always anticipating the kind of questions that are going to come out from the data that I'm presenting. So I anticipate those questions, and then I'm prepared to go and pivot in any direction they need me to go in. But yeah, you're absolutely correct. You do have to have that skill set too, and that comes with practice and time. That's not something that you're born with, but those are some of the things that have happened to me.
And that's important, right, Stacey?
Yeah.
Like, because it's the two sides of a coin, or you can say, so you can look at something as half full or half empty. But most important thing is, what is the purpose of what you're going to say? What do you want out of it, right? So go start with the end goal and then work backwards. If you're going to go and present how great a job you're doing, or like how great something is working, you focus on that. Or you want to get investment to get better, you focus on the opposite, saying, hey, look, we're here, but we still need to go here, so I need you to do this. So always think about what you want out of this and then build your story according to it.
I do have a question from the group. What is the key takeaway or insight that you want your audience to gain from the data story?
Isabel, do you want to go first?
That's a difficult one, right? Because it really depends on the audience. But for me so the way I present is, if I have so let's just say I have to, in my case, I have to present a portfolio for the year, for let's just say the 2024 portfolio is coming up. That is something that I have to do in the next couple of months. And my audience is going to be, there's a few audiences. One is going to be my manager, whom I have to present. These are the projects that came to me. Here's what we need to do. We need to prioritize. So my goal in messaging for him is, what are our priorities based on the requests that have come in? And how does that fit into everything we already have going on? When I take that information, after we do that exercise, I have to take that information and then we're going to present it to the executives. So at the executive level, it's not, the messaging is different. It's, okay, here's the priorities that we have for 2024. Does it align with the goals that the firm has, right? Are these the goals? Do they align? If they don't align, then we have to trim the fat and make sure that we have everything ready for the next group. So it really depends. The messaging is different, even though the content is the same, but the messaging is different based on the audience.
Great. So I love the trim the fat, right?
Yeah, I love that. I use that all the time. That's my favorite one.
So if I think of the key takeaways for this audience, right, Stacey, that's how I interpreted this question. Like, the people listening to us, if that is the audience, what are the takeaways they should take? First is like, I'm guessing the reason you came to this session is because you liked something or you were intrigued about it. Now, listening to me and Isabel and Stacey talk through this, think about, is this what you want to do, right? And we talked about all those different things. I mean, there's the whole Do I like data? Do I want to analyze data? Or do you want to communicate the data and be creative? All of those are important things. So think through that. Make sure you're passionate about it, because whatever you want to get into, you really want to be into. It shouldn't feel like work, as they say, right? So you want to be passionate about these things. And then you go and say, okay, I like this, and do a self-assessment, right? Where should I grow? Who are the people who are in jobs like these? And maybe I should talk to them and try to understand and see if this is what you want to do.
Yeah, and that comes with some of the critical thinking and the analytical mindset of, I always think like a data story, a presentation shouldn't leave you with more questions. And sometimes, you know, we get lots of college grads, they present a beautiful chart, but as soon as you look at it, you see, you know, a big exception or anomaly, and you're like, well, what is that? And they have to then go back and explain it. So I do think, you know, I'm answering the question too that the group asked, when you want someone to get a bit of a complete picture of the story too. So unless there's any other questions, is there one more question? No, I think I'm going to wrap up with kind of recap. We had some do's and some pitfalls. So, and these are great. And I've blended what Isabel and TR said. So the do, know your audience, understand the why. Clarity of message, your narrative. Have precision, have no bias and simplify, and practice. Practice, you have to practice out loud too, I think. Mm-hmm. Sometimes in your head it sounds great. So I've always liked to practice out loud. And then some pitfalls. Be aware of the selection of data. Fact check, data privacy, give credit where credit is due, and then bias, tone, messaging, be aware. And I think TR said a few different times, you know, context and understand why. So I think those are wonderful kind of recap from what we talked about today. And I wish everyone luck in their data storytelling and visualization journey.